Hi everyone, thank you for joining me for today's recording of the Activist Lawyer podcast. Today's episode features Michael Madden. Michael Madden is with Madden and Finucane Solicitors based in Belfast. It's a great interview. We go through a lot of Michael's recent high-profile cases, including the Pat Finucane inquiry and also the post office scandal cases that he has been working on. Lots of interesting stuff and a really great episode for anybody interested in getting into criminal work and also human rights cases as well. So lots of good advice there. I hope you enjoy it. Just by way of introduction, Michael is a qualified solicitor advocate specialising in criminal law. He represents clients throughout each stage of the criminal justice system, from clients under arrest in police stations through to the Magistrates' Court, Crown Court, High Court and the Court of Appeal. He also regularly represents prisoners before the Parole Commissioners of Northern Ireland. Michael also acts as a solicitor advocate for clients detained under the Mental Health Order before the Mental Health Review Tribunal and has a special interest in human rights law. Michael attended the office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights in New York as part of a new human rights campaign team concerning the independence of lawyers, highlighting the murder of Pat Finucane in particular. And we talk a little bit more about that case and others in great detail. I hope you really enjoy today's episode as much as I did recording it. And thank you again for tuning into the Activist Lawyer podcast. I am delighted to be joined by Michael Madden in the studio from Madden Finucane Solicitors. Michael, thanks so much.
No problem. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, you made a journey down from Belfast today.
It's a small jaunt. I'm used to it. My wife's from Newry, so I'm up and down that road dealing with the eyes closed.
Down to the big smoke. No, it's great to have you in the studio today. And of course, I had a little stint in your firm not so long ago. Well, no, it actually was quite long ago when I think about it, about 11 years.
Yeah, well, we're sorry to lose you, Sarah.
Oh, thank you very much. It was a lovely firm, but extremely busy. That's what I remember. Everybody was it was a very, very, very busy firm at that time. I'm sure it hasn't stopped.
Yeah, it's still hectic as ever.
Yeah, we'll talk about some of your cases today in a bit more detail, because I know you've been involved in quite a few high profile cases recently. But before we get to that, can you tell us a little bit about how and why you got into law?
Well, maybe I didn't have a choice. I'm the son of Peter Madden, who started the firm Madden Finucane along with Pat Finucane in 1979, and I was born in 1979. So that's where I started. And I suppose, like many kids, many children look at their father as their hero, and I certainly looked at my father as my hero. I still do. And I would have seen my father, I would have seen Pat on the TV quite a bit growing up. I mightn't have really understood what the stories were about, but I knew they were important enough for him and my dad to be on the TV, on the radio. So it was something that I was always really wanted to get involved in. And when I was 13, I used to go into the office on a Saturday, spend the day there, meant to be doing filing. Don't know how much filing I actually got done, but it was enough to get some pocket money for the week.
Oh, wow.
So
Score.
Yeah. So I'd be in, and then I would spend the rest of the week going in to try and raise petty cash to get my fiver. So that's the kind of background I had, and just been in it and amongst the practice, in the early 90s, was just great to see. I mean, it was a really vibrant place. You would go in on a Saturday. Yeah. It was even on a Saturday, it was a busy office.
A Saturday,
yeah. You'd have solicitors, you would have secretaries, you would have people coming in on a Saturday, and then during the week, you would go in, and it was really an electric place to be, because it was just the offices back then would have been in Victoria Square. So the old Victoria Square. Before it was obviously done up into the shopping centre. Mm-hmm. It was like a Victorian building, so you would go in and it was like a rabbit warren of rooms and files everywhere, people everywhere, clients everywhere, and it was just people would have time for you. Yeah. They would chat to you. People really at the top of their game, but they'd take the time to chat through things with you, and was
so you had a really great, I suppose, image maybe of how things worked from a very early age. That kind of family connection, I suppose, it helps in some respect to try and get you really your teeth into what's happening. And what was it, the same kind of practice areas in those days? I know back in probably 1979 and onwards, there were difficult times in Northern Ireland, and the cases would have been quite unique, I guess, as well, that would have been brought. Did the firm remain, what type of practice was it at the beginning, and what type of work have you veered into?
Well, I would hope the ethos of the firm is the same today as it was in 1979. Pat and my father really developed the law to represent people, maybe in ways that hadn't been done before that, or certainly to the extent that it done whenever they got going. They really developed public law, judicial reviews, inquests. These are the types of uses of the law to represent people. So that mightn't have been used before, and they
very novel.
Very novel, and it was novel. There were obviously people who had been murdered by the state, state involvement, paramilitary murders, and they were very difficult times to practice. Now I always think of myself as being extremely fortunate in what I grew up with, and in my practice, I didn't have to deal with the hostility that really would have been there whenever Pat and my father were practicing.
Yeah, and certainly not at the same level anyway, although
nothing
challenges present. So very, very difficult times. And are you primarily in criminal practice? What type of work does the firm offer at the moment? Yeah,
so the firm probably be well known for the criminal work that we do, but we're probably almost 50-50 civil work as well as the criminal work. So we would have a big, again, public law practice, judicial reviews, civil law, everything, road traffic, accidents, the whole lot. So
a mix, because I remember we mentioned briefly that I worked for a little while in Madden Finucane, a lovely busy office, but you taught me pace and trained me in pace with my first meetings with clients in police stations, which is very daunting, very overwhelming when you first start out. Are you still involved in that work, and what type of, for anybody listening, I mean, how do you describe that? For me, it was overwhelming, but again, very enjoyable in the sense that you didn't know what you were going to get, and you met with different people all the time. So
it's I treat whenever you get the call, as you say, you don't know what you're going to get. There's no preparation. It could be absolutely anything. It could be somebody arrested for speeding down a motorway. It could be somebody who's been arrested for murder, and anything in between. So you just don't know what you're going to get. And for me, that's where I get the buzz from. I after university, I went to practice. I qualified in England.
Okay.
And I was in a firm that exclusively did criminal law in London, and they had a scheme where in England they have like an accreditation scheme where you could actually go into police stations before you're qualified. So I was going to police stations, going around London. 2 years before I was qualified, so it was great. I loved it, and funny the Met at that time, maybe probably still is, was fairly hostile as well, and so you had that bit of adversarial tension, and for me it was a great experience. But I enjoyed it. You go out there and. It is daunting because you're going there, especially when you're just out, and you're maybe coming up across very experienced detectives, and they're trained, spent a lot of time training on how to deal with solicitors, and you're coming out for the first time and having to deal with this. So, but same way that I hopefully help to do the bit of training with you, Sarah.
Exactly. You need the training, but I think it's something you'd get used to as well, because then you'd start to know who you're dealing with in terms of whatever officer was there. And
that's maybe the advantage of Belfast and Northern Ireland, where you do get to see the same people all the time, and people get to know you. You get to know them. In London, you'd never see the same person twice, which maybe has other advantages, but certainly here.
No, it's so interesting. And we've had people on before who specialise in criminal, and they live for that, for the interviews as well. So I suppose it's different jokes for different folks.
Absolutely.
It's not for everybody, but it certainly makes for interesting work. And it's very fast-paced, like extremely fast-paced in terms of your practice as well. And of course, those cases can lead to ultimately, bigger and wider implications and cases that you probably deal with to the very end. In terms of justice, criminal justice cases too.
Absolutely, yeah.
This is great. Well, we might move on to talk about a few of your cases at the moment. And just for listeners, we're here obviously based in Northern Ireland, and we're talking about cases that are mostly centred here. But just to go back in time to one of the first cases that you worked on as a young solicitor, or maybe a newly qualified solicitor. But so people can understand, and a lot of people will already know this case no matter where they're based, but it's taken us back to 1972. Where 13 people were shot dead and at least 15 others injured when members of the Army's Parachute Regiment opened fire on civil rights demonstrators in an area called the Bogside, which was predominantly a Catholic part of Derry. And the day became known, of course, as Bloody Sunday, a very dark day of the Trouble in this part of the world. You were involved very early on in that case. Was it one of your first cases, maybe your first high-profile case? You might walk us through your involvement and how it felt.
Sure, it would have been my first experience of law outside, doing your admin in the office. So, again, I count myself as extremely fortunate that my father trusted me enough to take me in and really, I just wanted to help out in whatever way I could in the office, and he trusted me enough to bring me in and help out on that case. It was such a huge case, of such a huge commitment of resources to properly represent that case. Now, my involvement would have been probably around. I was only at university still, so I was only just starting university, so I was only really helping out. In the summer breaks. And particularly I remember my first summer break would have been around 1998 when we were just starting the Derry office. The inquiry, I think, only started to hear, it was only just announced. We were getting the office ready, and I was meeting the families were coming in, and they were very gracious. I was just some young kid, wet behind the ears, university, and they were very gracious with their time. And I was maybe, going around introducing people, making coffee for people, that kind of thing. And they were very gracious to me, and I was only too keen to try and help them in their case. One of the things that I helped with was really was contacting witnesses for Bloody Sunday, because once the inquiry was announced, there was a big exercise into trying track down all the witnesses to the case. Now you can imagine how many thousands of people were there that day, and trying to, 25 years later, trying to track people down. Now there had been a lot of work done. There were books, and there were witness statements taken. So there was something to start with. But that was really my exercise. Was contacting people and then trying to introduce them then to the lawyers in the firm, who did the qualified lawyers, who would then take proper statements. But to me, at that time, I could speak to somebody, and they maybe people you would speak to hadn't thought about it, or well, not hadn't thought about it, but hadn't dealt with it. And whenever I spoke to them, you could just tell they were back there on the day, as if it was 25 years ago. It was that raw to them. So to be able to help people in that way, to me, I was just give me more of this. I want to try it. This is worthwhile. This is worthwhile work. And that gave me a real taste and a real drive to continue doing that type of work.
Brilliant. And of course your firm continued to do that type of, be legacy work, or how would you maybe describe those cases? A lot of inquests and tribunals.
Yeah, so there's and again, this is still very, very live today, when you've got the Legacy Act that is now hopefully going to be repealed. It doesn't look like it's going to be repealed in full, but certainly major parts of the Act are going to be repealed. where we represent, again, people who've died during the Troubles. They haven't had proper processes to try and find out what happened to their loved ones who died. And it's really hard to believe that an act as callous as the Legacy Act was able to get through Parliament.
It is.
It just beggars belief that something like that is able to go through a parliamentary process and deny people the right, take away just their bare basic rights to that anybody would expect in a what should be a civilised society.
And of course, with the Bloody Sunday case, I mean, there was some outcome, I guess. How did it feel to see it come to some sort of conclusion when you were working so closely with the families?
Yeah, well, again, I mean, I remember the likes of Mickey McKinney, whose brother William had been murdered, John Kelly, whose brother was also murdered. Again, chatting, and again, it's heavy stuff you're dealing with in terms of work, but you know, they're great people, and you know, there's a bit of crack outside having to deal with the hard work, and they're really lovely people and very open and gracious, and to be able to see the work that was done throughout the inquiry. And again, I was fortunate enough to be in the Guildhall in 2010 whenever the Prime Minister at the time, Cameron, had made the apology in the Guildhall, where all the family, I mean, people were hanging from their rafters in the Guildhall to hear it. And I was there with my father and the rest of the legal team and the families to hear that apology, and just to see that process over 35 years to get to that point was a real moment for me, and I was just glad to be there. So, and I think that's maybe something that maybe gives a bit of hope and optimism to the people who are interested in this kind of work and follow this kind of work, that it's very easy to say you'll never get an answer. What's the point? It's the British government. You know, they've been doing it for hundreds of years. You'll never win. And these kinds of moments hopefully give people hope that you know, you keep at it, and you can get answers. Mickey McKinney, he's still fighting at the moment. The PPS had taken a decision not to prosecute Soldier F, who was accused of murdering his brother. We then took a judicial review against the PPS, against that decision, and that prosecution is now reinstated. It was in court only this week when his defence team had attempted to have the case stayed at an early stage. That failed, so at the moment that case is still going to continue on.
Wow, so they're so resilient, and
it
just takes over their lives. And as you said, though, they have to just live through it, but to keep fighting against a system that was totally against them.
I mean, nobody asks for a life like that. I mean, nobody in a million years would ask for a life like that. But to see people do that and to stand up for their family, I mean, it is probably inspiring to see people do that. And
it's great for you then, for someone who started, you know, so young and working with those families at a very young age, and that really inspired you then to continue that work. It had such a great impact on you and of course other people within your practice as well. Another case you've been working on that's quite high profile, but I think we're still waiting judgment, the Castlewellan Three case. Can you...
Yeah, that's a case again. Would have been through the Troubles period, where there were three men who were arrested in 1980, which was 5 years after the murder of Francis Rice in 1975, and that was outside a bar in Castlewellan, where a man was Francis Rice was stabbed and he died, and the three men who then were arrested. And they were convicted based on their confessions that were made to police. Now, immediately after the confessions were made, the three men were very, very adamant that they were innocent, despite making those confessions being taken, and they pleaded not guilty in court. They were ultimately convicted based on the confessions, but they have maintained their innocence throughout the rest of their lives. Two of those men, George Kirkpatrick and Cyril Cullen have since deceased, unfortunately. Eric Cullen is the only surviving member of the three men, and all three have their cases through the Court of Appeal.
Okay.
Because it's what has transpired is that the police officers who took those confessions have been totally discredited in other cases.
Right.
There was the case of Latimer, the case of Patrick Thompson, where those same officers were proved to be liars, were proved to have concocted false confessions, used ill treatment on people. So these same officers were involved in this case. So that's something we've taken to the Court of Appeal. We've had a full hearing and we're just waiting for the judgment. So we'll have to see how that goes.
That's interesting.
We're very hopeful.
Good. So quite challenging and quite heavy cases too to deal with. And moving on to the next case as well, that I know is very close to you and very close to your family. And a lot of people here would have been following this, and we've had quite some good news, some breakthroughs in it recently. And that would be Pat Finucane and the public inquiry. So for listeners, Pat Finucane, many will know, was a high-profile solicitor who was, on the 12th of February 1989, shot at home in front of his wife and children in, again, a very controversial time and controversial killing during the Troubles. And Pat's family and, of course, his legal team have fought a decades-long, it must be 30 years, is
over
it, or
35,
more? 35 years, campaign for justice, for an inquiry, just for an inquiry into his murder. And I know your firm is obviously closely tied as well and closely connected. That, of course, was your father's partner when he set up. And you've worked alongside the family. So I'm interested in hearing what maybe your thoughts are in terms of the recent developments. We've seen a lot of news coverage about it, but how did the family feel?
Well, the family, have to say, they're absolutely awe-inspiring in terms of what they have gone through. For 35 years, Geraldine, Pat's wife, Michael, John, his two sons, and Catherine, have been nothing but immense dignity throughout that whole time. And to have to fight again for just the very basic right to know what happened. It's disgraceful that has to happen in this day and age. Now, again, a lot of people maybe didn't think we would see an inquiry.
Yeah.
And it's obviously a very hugely positive thing that has happened, that the inquiry's been announced. And again, it's the public inquiry that's absolutely essential to try and get to the bottom of what actually happened to Pat, because it's very clear that the fingerprints of the British state are all over the case, are all over the weapons that were used to shoot Pat. I mean, the information that has come out already throughout the various, you had the Stevens inquiry, you had different reviews, you had the Silver Review. So there have been different reviews up until this point, which has uncovered some information. And just for some highlights, the weapons that were used in the murder were British Army weapons. After the weapons were recovered, absolutely astoundingly, the weapons went back to the British Army. And again, maybe just for example, some of the other cases that I've dealt with, a common feature would be that immediately after a tragedy where the state could be implicated in some way in what happened, it tends to be one of the first things that happens is that the victims have their reputations tarnished. I mean, for Bloody Sunday, you had the Woodry report, you had the media coming out and calling people bombers, rioters, gunmen, when they were completely innocent people. Again, for the post office case, which maybe discuss later, again, these people were innocent, hard-working people, were criminalised, went through the criminal courts. in Pat's case, what I think is one of the most sinister aspects in his case, it wasn't a reactive attempt to tarnish his name, but it was actually prior to his murder. You had a government minister, a Tory minister, come out in Parliament and say that there are solicitors in Northern Ireland who are, almost in support of the IRA. So,
yes.
So the fact that a government minister has come out to say that really put a target, and everybody knew, anybody in Northern Ireland would have known whose target had been placed on, and that was Pat Finucane.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it, and so this is a case where all the evidence that's come to light has shown government, state actors, the people who have pulled the triggers, were state agents.
Yeah.
So there's state fingerprints all over this case, and I think what's remarkable as well for the Finucane family, they have consistently always said that they don't care about the people who pull the trigger. I mean, I suppose any dummy can pull a trigger. What they have always wanted to know is, why did it happen? Mm-hmm. Who did it? And who ordered it? And who was complicit in it?
Yeah.
And that is the only venue, the only forum to try and get that answer is a public inquiry, where the public inquiry has the power to call witnesses, cross-examine witnesses, and investigate. It's not a review.
It's not a review. Yeah, it's not enough for a review. Yeah.
Our review is a very dry exercise that looks at documents, reviews documents, and that just is not compliant with trying to find out how somebody was murdered.
And I suppose there's always going to be concerns that with these public inquiries happening at such a late stage, how many opportunities might have been missed. Is that ever something that arises? Are you satisfied that this is the best outcome that we can get in terms of examining it in a fair and procedural way?
Well, it's the only possible outcome. There just isn't any other forum that could try and get to the bottom.
It's that or nothing.
It's that or nothing, essentially. Yeah.
And you mentioned there, the case is cited. You're going back in time there, mentioning, somebody in Westminster making that statement. But we've had that recently from the Tory government, who have in fact, from what they've said, certain members potentially endangered the lives of solicitors across the UK. And we've seen action being taken after they've made certain statements. And in response to that, Pat Finucane's case is always used as a reminder of the seriousness of making those threats to solicitors who are merely doing their job. And it's sad to see that that's something that as recently as last year we've seen mentioned, and the year before in particular. It's interesting that that's still a thread that we have to actually stand up against, that's being used. It's
people doing their job, representing people, maybe people that the state would rather disappeared, and it just goes against all sense of fairness, all sense of just basic justice.
Yeah.
That then the people that represent those people are also attacked.
Yeah.
It's just, I think probably one of the most ironic things about the latest attacks on lawyers and the latest attacks on the European Convention is the fact that it was actually a Tory lawyer, a Tory politician, a Tory minister who was one of the main authors of the convention. So I don't think that irony can be lost.
But it continues to this day. Very, very worrying. But just, you mentioned, I suppose that's a massive. When do we expect the public inquiry, or is there any timelines?
Yeah, there's no specific timeline at the minute. The terms of reference are still being drawn up at the moment. So, the OMA inquiry that was recently announced, I think that took around about a year before the announcement, and then the inquiry getting anywhere towards being set up. So it could be a bit of time yet.
Okay. Well, really, really interesting, and I wish anybody working on the case and the family well, because that's going to take an extra lot of strength as well to get through that element, I'd imagine. You touched briefly there on the post office cases, so very different from a lot of your work, but essentially, again, acting for people who have been at the receiving end of an extreme miscarriage of justice across the UK. People might be familiar, I think there was quite a few programmes, documentaries, wasn't it? The Alan Bates versus the Post Office was the big ITV documentary in that. So it's the post office scandal is basically what this miscarriage of justice has become known for. And Michael, you've been involved with is it sub-masters is the name, with Northern Ireland sub-masters in particular. How did you get involved, and where are we with those cases?
Yeah, well, I was representing initially two clients, Alan McLaughlin and Lee Williamson, and that was initially we got their case into the Court of Appeal. So they were sub-postmasters who had been caught up in the scandal. They had convictions, and they believed that those convictions were part of what was emerging as false convictions relating to this Horizon scandal. So,
which is, of course, the software system wasn't it, the accountancy side of Fujitsu?
So I mean, you mentioned the program, the ITV program. That was the great thing about it, because it really put a human face on what happened. Because I think the general public, and there's no criticism at all, I think the general public maybe found it difficult to understand what it actually was, because people reading the paper, somebody's convicted about a computer bug, that story's competing with all the other stories of the day. People maybe goes over their head, or they don't really think too much about it. But the program, I think, really did a great job at just showing people what this actually was, and how it really was an attack on the rule of law. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. Like I said, just as a very brief nutshell, what happened was these sub-postmasters who, again, to be a sub-postmaster in the first place, you're a business person, you're somebody who has to go through stringent checks to check that you're a proper person to get the contract with Post Office. And then so they're working as a sub-postmaster in the Post Office in a branch, and they have an accountancy software program called Horizon. And what was happening was that at the end of every month, or it was every week at some stages, people were balancing their books, and they just weren't balancing. So, usually the last people think is that it's the computer that's making the problem, or the calculator's wrong. Everybody has I think it's a natural tendency to think, I've just missed something out, or I've done something wrong. So that's kind of what was happening. And then, but this was happening to thousands of people at the same time. And I think it's probably easier to say who wasn't affected by Horizon.
I was going to say that if it was thousands.
Thousands. So these people were left scratching their heads. How do I fix this? Maybe £10 down in the float this week. Look, I'll just stick maybe £10 out of my own pocket in it just to get the thing through the check at the end of the week. But it would gradually build up, and before you know it, people were thousands of pounds out, and they didn't know how to fix this. The computer wouldn't work. They would ring the helpline didn't help, and then they have an audit with Post Office. So you have a Post Office investigator turns up out of the blue, look at your books, look at your screens, and then how do you explain this? You can't explain it. So you're then basically threatened, right, you have until the end of today to go and get the money to balance the books, or
personally to get the money.
Personally, I mean, there are if you, and this is all online, the inquiry that's ongoing at the minute, has been here now for the last couple of years, but there are impact witnesses who provided their stories at the inquiry, and it's all on YouTube. You can go and look this up. But there's really heart-wrenching stories.
Yeah.
You've women who are going about their families, raiding the child's piggy bank. I mean, this happened. to try and get money out of the piggy bank to try and bring it down to this audit and to give to the auditor. So, and then they were threatened, well, if you don't get this, you're going to jail. You're going to prison. We're going to prosecute you. You've no defence, and you're going to jail.
Is this the post office saying this?
So you initially had the way this was first came to light with the post office would have been the auditors. Okay, so you had the post office auditors. After the audit, then what would usually happen is then post office would have their own investigators. So post office employees who are investigators, so they would prosecute.
I see.
Their own. So they would have the power to prosecute in the criminal courts, right. And so investigate and prosecute.
How did I still, no matter what, to this day, I cannot get my head around it, given the numbers.
Yeah, so thousands of people, and then they would end up go through the process and end up with these convictions. People go to jail,
and they did go to jail.
And they did go to jail.
Yeah,
went to jail, and what post office would actually do then? They would use the fact that they were getting successful convictions, and they would double down on the fact that they would say, well, look, we've had so many convictions. We've had 59 convictions this month, and nobody has successfully raised the defence based on horizon problems. So therefore, everything we're doing is correct. And it just kept going. And the more convictions they got, the more they doubled down, and they continued prosecuting people and convicting people at the same time. And again, this has come to light as well, that there were a number of reviews internally through post office who were trying to find out, because obviously there were people who were raising issues.
Yeah.
And I mean, it just beggars belief that thousands of people who were, again, had never been in any kind of trouble, good character, post office never had this kind of issue before. Why are thousands of people now suddenly become thieves overnight?
Convicted.
So, the reviews that have come out have shown that that post office did have their suspicions. They knew that there were problems with Horizon, but they continued to prosecute people, continued to bring people to court at that time. In fact, there was even after one review, the Clark review, head of security in post office then issued an order to shred a lot of the evidence, and then the lawyer who was doing the review had to issue further guidance to say, no, this is not something you should be doing. So this is the kind of...
But to even go that far, I mean, they're all concerned about reputational damage to post, but they were damaging them. Like, how did nobody... I'm sorry.
No.
I just can't seem to... I can't understand... Only that we know it's true. If this was fiction and you would not believe it.
You wouldn't believe it. You would say, look, this is too far-fetched. Yeah. This is too far-fetched. This isn't going to get published. Yeah. It's ridiculous. But it happened. And that's one thing that the inquiry's looking at the minute.
Is there a separate inquiry then?
So yes, so there's a separate inquiry. That's been running now. It's coming to the end, actually. And you might have... probably the hearings will finish shortly after the new year, and then the hope is that we'll have the findings then possibly by the end of next year.
And separately alongside that, what about the convictions then? Have they all been quashed, or what way were people left?
Yeah, there was the civil case first of all. The Alan Bates civil case came through, and they successfully were able to prove that what they suspected was that this was a computer problem. It was a computer glitch. It wasn't that they were criminals. So they were successful. They got compensation, and a lot of the material that came out during that civil case was then used for Court of Appeal cases to get convictions overturned. In this jurisdiction, again, we've managed to get convictions overturned. And the great thing about the ATV drama that came out in January, because it really got the public's attention, then things moved unbelievably fast.
It was through the system?
It was absolutely hectic at the start of this year for me personally, because so many people who still, even though there had inquiries been established, you had, it was in the public more, still hadn't come forward to do anything about it. Well, that's a good question, and again, it's the first thing that I would ask.
Yeah.
And again, the similar pattern. It's amazing how the similar pattern was the same for the people that you would meet. That the trauma they had gone through, they had just managed to deal with it in whatever way they could deal with it, and almost like box it off in their head and move on. And these are business people.
Yeah.
They went on to try and have other careers and do different things, and they just wanted to have it keep behind them and not open it up again.
Of course, the trauma, and just so listeners are clear, people went to prison and others were completely financially ruined. Their reputations within some of their small villages and communities were completely ruined. There were family breakups, mental health, severe mental health issues, physical health problems came out of it. It's really, really damaging when you look at the individual cases. And of course, why wouldn't they feel like that? So of course, as you say, maybe people, to kind of be re-traumatized again, maybe that there was a fear of
absolutely
coming forward. So yeah,
that's exactly what it was. And thankfully as well, because of the public attention and the public pressure, then there was new legislation that came in pretty lightning fast to then overturn any horizon convictions. So you didn't have to have the court case, the litigation then, and the court of appeal. And essentially what happened here in Northern Ireland is that the DOJ go through their own checks to check that this new legislation applies to the convictions. So it's like so that process, and to be fair to DOJ, they have done that fairly fast, and we've had 3 clients who have had their convictions overturned through the legislation. So that legislation was introduced in May, and the convictions that were then overturned in September. There are some other convictions that aren't as straightforward. We're still hopeful to get them overturned, but
it's incredible. And then what redress is available then? Obviously, how do they work out the kind of financial compensation? Or?
So there are various schemes for the people who have had their convictions overturned. There's a redress scheme where essentially you can have an automatic payment of 600,000, and if somebody doesn't feel that meets the adequacy of what happened to them, they can put in an assessment, and it'll take a bit longer, but they may get more. But if they don't want to go through that process, they can take the automatic payment.
Gosh, I just can't imagine how, even financially, it's never ever going to make up for what those families and people went through.
Yeah,
it's shocking.
It's and because it's the effect it had on people's own psyches. They doubted themselves for so long. They felt that they'd let down their families, their reputations, and their community were destroyed. It really did. It destroyed their lives. There's no other way to put it.
No, it's unbelievable. But yeah, an interesting one to work on, nonetheless, in terms of seeing, and getting justice for people locally here who might not have come forward.
Absolutely, maybe. And again, it's a bit like going back to the Bloody Sunday case, meeting people. Trying to, people who are grateful that you're there to help them. It's part and parcel of why I went in to try and solve what my father and my Pat did. It's the exact type of case where gives me the biggest buzz to try and work on.
And that leads us nicely into our next question, which is about that. And we've touched on some of your cases. There's so much that we could have gone through. But in terms of working on those kind of complex, challenging cases, and with people who are extremely vulnerable, at their worst and maybe have no voice, it takes a lot of energy and skills as well. We're all lawyers, and you use the skills that we've picked up and that we've learned. But how do you find, or do you find a balance between, I suppose, your professional life and then your personal life? How does that work for you?
Well, I can't come down to Newry and not mention my amazing wife, Fiona, who's also from the city. And I'm very fortunate that I've got that support at home. But yeah, it can take a bit of time, I think, to try and work it out. And I think everybody has to find their own balance, and maybe it takes a bit of time to get that. For me personally, I love running. You mightn't think that to look at me, but I love running. I get out and it clears the head. There's no mobile phones, and you're just there in my own thoughts and get the head cleared. And that's maybe my personal.
Yeah, it's important. Yeah. Because it is challenging, and I suppose then, as you say, you get your own way and you get used to it, and it probably could be overwhelming for anyone starting off, but you kind of, like anything else, you start to come across similar cases and you know how to maybe deal with them, and you have a bit more confidence, I guess, is a big thing too.
Yeah, I mean, if it's the type of law that interests you,
yeah.
I mean, it's I think the type of law that myself and you get into, it's maybe attracts people who are interested in people.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not a dry exercise. Yeah. It's people who want to help people.
Yeah.
And get involved with people, and your day is day in, day out. You're dealing with people. You're hopefully helping people, and it's challenging, but hopefully rewarding at the same time. And
sure.
And what I would say to anybody who's interested in the work is the knock on the door, you know, send an email in, try and get the experience, come in for work experience, anybody who's studying. And again, I was so fortunate that I had my father there, who brought me in, but at the same time, you know, I'm always looking for people contacting the office to say, look, could this be the next person who is the future of the firm?
Because it's not for everybody. I mean, it's not, as you say, you have to have that kind of, I suppose, it's not an ambition, but a passion for people.
Yeah.
You know, and working with people. And I mean, most people we've had on this podcast, activist lawyer, do work in human rights, criminal justice, and they're often of a similar background in terms of they wanted to help, and that's the basic reason that they got into this type of law. Yeah,
well, I mean, whenever the phrase activist lawyer, and I know where that comes from, and you've taken it and owned that phrase. But from me growing up, a lawyer meant helping people. That's what a lawyer meant, and you know, activist, you know, that was just part and parcel of what a lawyer was. And you know, there is scope, you know, for making change. I mean, it's there, and if people want to make change, even in a small way, feel that they're doing something to reward. And again, just maybe in a purely selfish way. I mean, we're talking about going out to police stations, going out there, and again, we're talking about the different, you don't know what you're going to get. You apply the same formula every time. What's the evidence? What's the weakness? What's the strength of the evidence? What defence does your client have? What are the options they apply in the interview? It's the same formula, and trying to work. And it's funny, I would go to start off every arrest, trying to get the disclosure, trying to get the information. And you get the information, you think, oh God, it doesn't look so good from a client here. Then you speak to your client and you get a completely different viewpoint. And you know, the old adage, there's two sides of the story. And then your job then is to try and present that in the best way possible. On the evidence. And you know, again, like that is challenging, but again, it is rewarding if that's something that you're interested in doing, just give it a go, and if it works for you,
brilliant advice. And on that theme of activist lawyer, the title of our podcast, and as you say, we know where it came from, linking back into our conversation about attacks on lawyers. Obviously it all feeds back, but activism and the law, I suppose you would work alongside campaigns, I guess, as well. So on one side you have, you know, grassroots campaigners, or the families, of course. And how do you think, I suppose, the legal tools and the legal system works well alongside that activism, or how do they kind of positively engage to make change?
Again, it probably depends on what way you look at the law and what your perspective is on it. Now, again, whenever I look at the law, I'm looking at a person. I'm looking at a person who has a problem that needs a solution, and that person has come to you to find that solution. Yeah. And it's not a dry exercise, you know. It's not, and that's why I don't think you'll ever have robots, thank God, looking at the post office case, coming in to take our jobs, because you're dealing with people, and you need people to help people, and you need to look at what is in their interest, what do they need, and you have to look at the person. And again, the likes of Bloody Sunday, the likes of post office, when you're dealing with people who, it is a campaign, it's over many years. And again, like, if that's something that you think would attract you, go into it, give it a go. I remember for the post office case, for example, I would have spent time going out and meeting people, and it's word of mouth. That's the advantage of where we live, that everything is word of mouth, and everybody gets to know you, and word spreads pretty quickly. And you know, I was going to meetings and meeting some families, and every meeting I would go to, there'd be somebody else there, and it would just build and build. And yeah, again, it's very rewarding. You go out and help speaking to people, and sometimes when you go out and meet people, you know, you might be 5% of what you're talking about is the actual case, or the law.
And then you don't know.
And then, you know, but yeah, it's that 5% is very important.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's why you're there. But you know, just the fact that you're there and being seen to help somebody, I think, gives somebody a lot of comfort.
Exactly. Yeah. And you're coming across different things every day, as you said. And just finally, I mean, we've had a glimpse into your day-to-day kind of operations, not mostly in relation to criminal law, but anybody who's listening who would like to, you know, have listened today and would like to get specifically into your type of work. You do hear concerns about young people or graduates who are worried about opportunities in human rights law or criminal because they don't hear a lot about it. What would you recommend for anyone who wanted to follow in your footsteps?
Send the CV in to the office and get as much experience as you can, and there's nothing else like it. I mean, again, my experience of going to university, I went to Queen's and essentially got through it. I don't think that I particularly enjoyed sitting there in the dry end of things and doing the academic side of things. Again, for somebody else, could be the complete opposite. They enjoy the academic, maybe not like the practical. But whenever I get into the practical side of things, and I know you have a passion for immigration. I mean, I remember going, again, before I was qualified, one of the very first types of law that I did was going to a screening interview for an asylum claim. And you know, dealing with a home office, very experienced home office interviewer, and I was there with my client. This was a Zimbabwean client who had come here after at the NDC in Zimbabwe. We're trying to challenge Mugabe. Pretty repressive reprisals were being taken out on the supporters of NDC. He travelled here with his mother, brought him here. But I was in this screening interview, and again, one of the very first things I'd ever done in a legal capacity, and you know, without using expletives, you know, I was really anxious and nervous, and I was there and spent a long time trying to understand what I was doing. And you know, it was meant to be a very straightforward, like it's just like personal details. None of the substantive reasons why you're seeking asylum are going to be going into in this interview. That'll be for the next substantive part. But then the Home Office person then started getting into the substantive stuff. And I was thinking, you know, have I got the wrong end of the stick here? You know, and you know, he must know what he's doing. But I like stuck to my guns and challenged him on what he was doing, and I thought, look, you know, I might be wrong, I might look a bit foolish, but this is not what I was expecting. Challenged him, and to my surprise, he backed down then and did what he was meant to be doing. So, but the client afterwards really was thankful and expressed how thankful he was to have somebody there with him who was able to stand up for him with him. And that's the kind of thing, you know, if that is the kind of thing that might interest you, get out, do it, see as much as you can, and it's all about experience, I think.
And know that it's challenging, but you can overcome those challenges with the support you get. And also making mistakes. We all make them, and I think people are often nervous in law if I do something wrong, you know, but very often, you know, you've got the support behind you.
Absolutely. And particularly when you are starting out, that's, you know, when you get to make your mistakes, and you only learn from making mistakes, really. And if you have the support, there isn't really anything that can't be fixed, and don't be afraid of making mistakes, is what I would say. Exactly.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for giving your time so generously, and I'm so interested in your cases. We really will watch with bated breath to see how some of particularly Pat's case that we spoke about today, and of course keeping close tabs on post office developments. It's an interesting one. Thank you so much for coming today.
Well, thanks for inviting me, and really love your work. Thank you.
Thank you. Great to catch up again after all those years.
Door's still open, Sarah.
Oh, great.
All that pace work you could be doing.
Oh, yeah. Do you have any pace work left for me? Thanks everyone for joining me today. If you like the show, please remember to share and leave a review if you have a moment. And you can also check out our website, www.activistlawyer.com, where you will see some blog articles written by our guests and contributors, as well as some fabulous Activist Lawyer merchandise.